Welcome to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today I have a very interesting guest with me. I have with us Mainak Dhar. I have with us Mr. Mainak Dhar, who's written a book named Leadership in 100 Words. Mainak is an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad and has been in the corporate field for over 25 years, working with blue chip multinationals, and has occupied leadership positions for a great chunk of his career. Known popularly on social media for his excellent advice, his book is something that will appeal to youngsters and for people in the corporate field across the board. And actually, it will just appeal to everyone who's looking to develop any kind of leadership skills. Do jump in for a really interesting conversation. Welcome to Kitabi Karwan, Mainak. I'm so glad to have you here. And again, like departing from like my usual first question, which I ask almost all my guests, which I will ask you in some time. But I want to give you the floor for like a minute or like 30 seconds, however you much want to take, and just talk about the book that we're going to talk about today, Leadership in 100 Words, your latest book that's come out by Bloomsbury. If you could just tell us a bit about it.
No, hi Siddharth, and thanks a lot for having me over. And I guess, my latest book really is born out of something I'm passionate about, which is mentoring and helping others grow. To be honest, I hadn't thought much about writing in that genre. Most of the stuff I'd written in the recent past had been thrillers. But over the last couple of years, just seeing a lot of the uncertainty people are going through, the fact that people could use coaching and advice and don't always have access to mentors, I think that's what really spurred me to try and put some of my thoughts together in the form of this book.
Right. No, and that's quite interesting because so it's not because that I'm talking to you on the podcast, but I remember when I was contacted about this book and I was reading your name, and I looked up your profile on LinkedIn and your these posts from which the book has come up, and I was just browsing and I think that's when something clicked. I remember one of my friends had sent it like a while back to me, like I think one of your posts which had helped him out or something. So I drew the connection from there. But Menak, what's something that a lot of my listeners are always curious about, particularly for writers like you? It's that I think today we live in a world where authors and writers have a far more public persona than they did, like say a couple of decades ago, basically before the internet, right? Or when before fast internet. Let's put it that way. So writer, but people still have certain sides of them which they keep hidden away inadvertently or like maybe on purpose. I don't know, however it goes. But is maybe you can tell us something about yourself which we won't find out through your LinkedIn profile or through googling you or maybe from the blurb of your book, like just a hidden side to you which our listeners might want to know.
Well, I guess all of us have those sides to our lives,
Of
Siddharth.
course.
For me, who I am as a writer is pretty much out there because I think every writer expresses himself through his books. I have a corporate career, and that's pretty much out there because I'm engaging with a lot of people. However, the most important part of my life, which others don't get to see, is I think my most important role I play is really for my family. So I'm
Uh-huh.
married to Pooja. We have a 13-year-old son, Adi. And I always tell people outside of work and writing, I'm a really boring guy because I just try and spend as much time as I can with my family. So that's something which people don't see of me on the outside, but
Right.
basically I'm a pretty simple family guy. I
Right.
don't party, I don't drink, I don't network a lot. For me, it's here. My priorities are pretty clear. It's my
Right.
family, it's the people at work counting on me, and then keeping
Right.
some time for my writing and my fitness.
Right. And personally, I don't think that's boring at all. I think taking out time for your family is one of the coolest things you could possibly be doing. And yeah, it's I think it's so the reason why I ask people this is particularly writers is a lot of aspiring writers are also readers and they're listening to this podcast. And I think it helps them to kind of know that well the person that they're reading is actually a human being, right? I mean, often when you're reading something it's very easy to detach that person from the realm of humanity that exists around you. They seem beyond what your usual person is, so it kind of helps to humanize the person who you're reading and know more about them. So Menak, before we jump into the book, what got you into writing in the first place? I mean, not was there, I don't know, did a teacher maybe once made you write an essay which kind of made you discover your love, or was it just something you always did?
No, I guess goes long back, Siddharth. So my dad was in the government, so we moved around a
Right,
lot. I went through 8
right,
different schools as a kid. born
Right.
in Nagaland, lived in Sikkim, Delhi, Canada, back to Delhi. So kept moving. And back then, late 70s, early 80s, no video games, no internet. My refuge was books. So I
Right.
developed a love for reading at a very early age. And somewhere along the way, I think that translated into me developing the love of just creating stories. So I had an
Right.
hyperactive imagination as a young child. I
Yeah.
had an imaginary friend in school. I used to keep writing all kinds of stuff. Once I'd written a diary
Hmm.
hoping to mess with the minds of future historians. I must have been 10 years old where I wrote a story. So I had read somewhere that the Dead Sea Scrolls had been found. So I wrote a whole
Right.
diary, just hoping 1,000 years later somebody will find this and think that the world ended because I think there was a meteor impact and a zombie outbreak. And I dug up our front yard and I buried it, hoping somebody'd find it. So
Right.
my mother actually indulged all this madness and she said, "Hey,
Yeah.
if you like making up stories, why don't you write?" So she
Yeah.
was the first person I think who put it in my head that look, this all these ideas buzzing around in my head, I could put them down on paper and express
Right.
myself. So I think that was the first time I really thought of writing. I know in terms of becoming an author, I was always a bit of a troublemaker. I had this imaginary friend next to me in class. I was 11 years old. I read this interview by Stephen King where he said, the moment anyone pays you a cent for your work, you're no longer a writer, you're a professional author.
Right.
So I had some poems written. I figured nobody'd pay me for my poetry. So I solved the maths textbook for the next term. And
Mhm.
then I photocopied, one side math solution, one side poetry, staples, sold them to my classmates, and came home and told my mother, now I'm a professional author. So, you know, that was kind of how but, on a serious note, I think really struck in my mind at a pretty early age that you can do two things with your writing. One, you can
Right.
actually make an impact to people. It's not just you're writing stuff
Right.
for your own catharsis or fun or entertainment. And
Right.
second, hey, people are willing to pay you for your writing if you write something
Right.
that's of use to them.
Right.
And so I published my first proper book when I was in college. And, I've been lucky to be able to follow my dream ever since then.
And I mean, that just goes on to reflect a lot of perseverance and like an strange clarity of thought from a young age. I mean, that this is something that you would ideally want, however, your ways of getting about it. But this is something that you were rooting for. And yeah, that's very interesting to always know because writers, I've always felt that, the word that everything that you describe उसे वो कहते हैं ना एक कीड़ा होता है राइटिंग का कीड़ा होता है सारे authors में and that can is very evidently reflected. In fact, that story about creating this fake diary for historians to discover. In fact, I didn't do a fake diary, but I was always very curious about this. So I tried doing this in like my building's backyard where I was trying to dig up something and like just bury some of my memorabilia, and all I did was just unleash some army of red ants, which had apparently built a small hill there.
Goodness.
That was a horrible memory from childhood. But so, Menak, just coming back to your book, you mean it's fabulous that you've done this, because I think like as a 26-year-old, I can completely empathize with the need for mentorship and just guidance of working in this area, because I think what also happens is for a lot of people, like particularly people who are born in the 90s, right, people who are born into post liberalization India, yeah, these are people who are there are hundreds and thousands of families who are experiencing a corporate culture in that sense for the first time. I mean, right, there was this huge boom of emerging MNCs and Indian companies are getting in on that culture, and in that sense it is things like leadership, or right, like micromanaging teams. These are newer concepts, like these are new ways of running businesses and working in this industry, and often you don't find guidance for it either because your people who can guide you are not well versed with that process, right? Like for my example, my father runs a small stockbroking firm, which is a very informally run firm. Like, I mean, the idea of teams and stuff doesn't really exist. So if I not that I work in a corporate field, but if I did, I mean, I could be found struggling to kind of get the right mentorship. And well, within the organization there are their own clashes, वगैरह. I mean, a lot of my friends have these issues. So I mean, it's great that you're doing this. One of the questions which I actually popped in my head when I was just reading your book was, why did you decide to convert it into the book in the first place? Because I mean, in today's day and age, given the very format that you've taken, like leadership in 100 words, which is excellent in its own ways, it has its cons, which we'll discuss later. But it is designed for social media. It's designed for the internet. So why a book? I mean, I think
Yeah.
you would be reaching most people through the internet. Why a book?
To be absolutely honest with her, and I guess I'm like this in most things I do in life.
Right,
I didn't start with a grand plan of writing a book or
right,
creating a series on LinkedIn. I think it must have been in 2019. I was having a chat with a friend at work. He had asked for
yeah,
some advice, and
right,
he said, "Hey, what you said makes sense. Why don't you share it with others?" I had never thought of sharing on social media.
right,
Generally, I'm not a guy who loves giving gyan. I don't want to pontificate and tell people this is how you should do things. So he said, no, this might be really useful. So I dashed off a post, came to 103 words. I cut it down to 100 and just put a hashtag. What I found, the first time I realized that this may actually mean something to people, is many people reached out and said, hey, this made sense. Why don't you share more ideas? I
right,
did that quite infrequently. I think two, I'd say, tipping points which really led up to this book. One was really the start of the lockdowns.
right,
So I saw that there were so many young people around us, either losing jobs, facing career uncertainties, a bunch of young people, having job offers rescinded. So I thought, let me try and help if I can. And I
right,
put out an open offer on LinkedIn saying, hey, if anybody wants help, reach out. I was quite surprised. Within a couple of weeks, I had more than 2 dozen, largely young people,
right,
reach out who didn't have mentors, didn't have access to senior leaders, and I found myself helping them one on one on pretty simple stuff, helping someone prepare for an interview, helping someone brush up their resume, giving someone advice about their career.
right,
That made me really feel that there's a large number of people out there who could use a helping hand, who don't have access to mentors. So I started posting more regularly, and one thing led to another. I'd post, people would ask questions, they would lead to more posts.
right.
The idea for the book actually came from readers. A
Okay,
couple of people wrote into me saying,
right,
look, it's great, we love your post, but we'd love to have something with us which we can consult whenever we need it, because we aren't on
right,
LinkedIn all the time. We
right,
might be at our workplace, we might have something on our mind, we'd love to be able to share it with others, people in our
right,
teams.
right,
So it was something that built organically. A few people reached out saying, why don't you write a book? And I said, hey, that makes sense.
right.
And I reached out to my publishers, and that's kind of how the book came about.
No, that's quite interesting, and I definitely get that. I mean, and I think there's just, and I'm grateful for this kind of I know innate human psychology that exists. Like as a reader, I love this, that uh, even if I know, like say if you put up like 100 posts on your blog, I would still prefer having them in a book by my side always, right? Like I can always reach them. I don't need to like anticipate an internet crisis ever. And as much as efficient like a blog sounds, right? I mean, I think I would always be one of those readers who'd ask you for a book. Like I think I was trying to play a devil's advocate when I was asking you this question. But something that actually also crossed my mind while reading the book and your post was that I think with the book you had an opportunity. So it actually also reminded me of a very this particular bit about 100 words, right? It's a fascinating thing because I think Lord Jeffrey Archer was speaking at the launch of one of his Clifton Chronicles books in Bombay, and I was there at the event, and he had this advice for aspiring writers where he said that if you can't narrate a story in 100 words, you're doing your job wrong, right? You should be able to, and he gave everyone this exercise that try and write a story in 100 words, which works absolutely great for fiction, right? Because fiction has a lot to do with the kind of story that you're telling. But coming to non-fiction, right? Non-fiction is something where descriptive forms, narrative forms matter a lot. Like the more detail you get into, obviously being succinct is a skill, and kind of getting it down is also something that's desirable. But particularly when it comes to elaborating on things, it's quite helpful to have this on the non-fiction end. So did that thought cross your mind while like converting your posts into books, that maybe you can, I mean, you do introduce the three different sections and you do write like
Yeah.
about 4 or 5 pages of introduction for each, but like apart from that, was there a reason why you didn't like get convert it into okay macro lessons from all these posts, or and just instead of that?
No, there is actually, Siddharth, my belief is mentors don't give you answers. And,
Right,
which is why I'm personally not a big fan of, so-called self-help books, because ultimately each one of us is on our own journey. We have to figure out our own path. Every one of us is unique. I believe the best mentors I've had are people who light a spark, give you a way of thinking about things, provoke questions, maybe make you ask questions you hadn't asked before. So that was very much on my mind as I, not even before I got to the book, as I was posting, rather than doing long form posts where I try and find a solution to a question. I said, let me focus on at least getting people to think about the issue,
Right.
either think about it in a different way or ask a few different questions they may not have, or introduce a different way of framing the issue that they're dealing with. That was my intention. I mean, you're right. Where it could have been extended is if somebody asks a question, then I am trying to give a solution or a framework to find the answer. And I don't think that's really what mentoring is about. Mentoring, and
Right.
in the introduction, I talk about, the origin of the whole world, mentoring, which is actually from Homer's Odyssey,
Right.
where, mentor, who's one of Odysseus's friends, is tasked with, helping his son Telemachus grow up in the right way. And he says, the voice you will find within yourself. And I think the concept of mentoring is that it's helping each person find their voice by stimulating thought, by stimulating dialogue. The one part which I do feel, honestly, a book is not ideally suited to do, which is why I would love for people to get in touch and chat, is the two-way dialogue that's, I think, inherent to any
Right.
mentoring journey.
Right.
And that's where I agree with you. Book is not the ideal format to do it.
Right.
So on, LinkedIn, I do a lot of that, and I find it immensely rewarding when, somebody responds,
Right.
or they sometimes have ideas that I may not have thought of because I'm learning as well,
Right.
or they share a perspective that's new for me. And that, I think, is the richest part of mentoring, which
Right.
inherently a book isn't designed to do.
Right.
So, how I try and compensate for that is, I do encourage people to write in. And I do have several readers who write in, through LinkedIn or my website, where we try and have that journey going.
Right. No, and Menak, it's actually very interesting when you were talking about this, because I think your approach that, and ideally, which I kind of agree with also, that a mentor doesn't answer your question. It just guide you and help you find the correct solution. It also is a very inherent reflection of the Indian ethos, because I think,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely.
right, if you look back to our cultural way of mentoring, or like our the Guru Shishya Parampara, or how our traditional education systems are designed, they do find their roots in this, or even our, and for that matter, I think mythologies across the world, they're stemmed with gray, right? There's no black or white, and that is, I think that's the best possible way of approaching things. And yeah, I absolutely agree. I think for a two-way interaction, that's where books fail completely. And I know, I mean, as much as I love to read, I'm a huge bibliophile, but I hate to agree with you here that I think in that sense, when you're mentoring, I think it's the best way is to have a two-way communication. But Menag, let's just take a step back from the book and like get back to you. I see a huge collection of books in the background. You're a writer as well, so I think I can safely assume you're a voracious reader, or at least love to read. So maybe can you tell us a bit about that? Where did you start reading? Was it a, I know. So I because I run a bookstagram as well, and people sometimes turn to me when they want to start reading. So often I find people either want to start reading at younger ages for professional perspectives, that oh, this will help us with our language, or or it'll help me with a job, or they just want to read about things they're interested in. What was it for you? Like,
I
were
guess
you
for me, at a very early age, like I mentioned, when you're moving around every couple of years, going to new schools, new cities, I guess books were my friend. They were my refuge, they were my escape. So
right?
some of my fondest and earliest childhood memories are, we stayed in Delhi for some time. My grandparents were in Kolkata, visiting
Right.
them in the Rajdhani. I'd be curled up on the top bunk reading a book. I think it
Right.
was a 14, 15-hour train journey. I'd read for God knows how many hours.
Right.
And I think the books, I think, that really got my imagination going at an early age. I think I owe a huge debt of gratitude to J.R.R. Tolkien. I mean, Lord of the Rings, it just blew my mind. At an early
Right.
age, I must have been 8, 9. It just blew my mind that somebody could have created a whole world. It's not
Right.
just a story with languages, with
Right.
characters. That, I think, really made a very deep impression on me, on the power of storytelling and the power of books,
Right.
and really made me think of, hey, I'd love to create some stories of my own.
Right. No, and I absolutely agree with you, because I think, especially when it comes to fiction and fantasy fiction, even though now as a 26-year-old, it's not that I read a lot of fantasy fiction, but I have tremendous respect for authors who manage to, I know, grasp the imagination of their audience to an extent that there's mad fan following behind it. You're creating a world which a person very sanely knows doesn't exist. Even a child knows that this world doesn't exist, but you still find yourself being able to get lost in it and derive lessons from it and just let it take over your psyche, which is, I know, it's the strangest kind of power like authors possess, right? Drawing the audience into a world which doesn't exist. And I can imagine, like, so I think a lot of my journey, so I am from, my family is from Kanpur and I live in Bombay, so a lot of train journeys used to happen as a child as well. So for me, it was a lot of my books, but they were also coupled with so I don't know if it still happens, because it's been a while since I've traveled on trains, where wo jo wheeler के bookstores होते, stalls
Of
होते थे,
course, of course.
where you could buy
Yeah.
your Chacha Chaudhry's, your Pinkies and Pillows.
Yeah.
So for me that was
My
like
God,
a
I'm surprised they
fascination.
still read Chacha Chaudhary. I used to read them when I was a young kid.
Yeah, I think they're evergreen. I think for me it was a fascinating thing that when we are traveling by train, so we used to be like, okay, I will buy Chacha Chaudhry's, because Bombay mein you can't buy them at your local. There you'd get your equally great Tinkles and Amma Chitrakathas and everything. But Menak, so two quick questions for you. One, I won't ask you to name your favorite book. I think that's just a sin. I wouldn't ever put a reader through. But maybe if you could tell us a book or maybe a couple of books which have impacted you as, like, not just as an author, but right, as a person, which have just really shaped things for you or made you think, look at the world in different ways. And secondly, like just kind of focusing back on your book, or which maybe a lot of our listeners can benefit from, is, I'm not asking you to again name books on leadership. I think that's just there are loads of them out there, including yours. But how reading as a habit? How does reading as a habit kind of help in shaping leaders, or just helps people through their corporate lives or deal with their professional lives? If you could elaborate on these two things.
So yeah, let me take the first one. Yeah, I actually have, I guess you could call it a book version of a go-to playlist. I have a bunch of books which I have made my
Nice.
go-to for some, in some cases 35 years. So
Okay.
like I
Oh
still
wow.
have this really well thumbed copy of Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, which now my son has kind of picked up. That's there. The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. I
Right.
have a collection of poetry by Vikram Seth,
Right.
collection of short stories by Roald Dahl. So these are books which, through all the things that have happened in my life, growing up, going to hostel, getting a job, getting
Right.
married, losing my mom pretty early, in some way or the other, these have all been a part of my life.
Right.
And so I used to keep referring to the Prophet. I remember I was really young. I was your age when I lost my mom to cancer. So I remember I was alone, living abroad. I used to just keep, and I used to read it, and I used to just find solace. I used to find ways of thinking about stuff, and not that it
Right.
solved any issues, but there are memories associated with it.
Right.
Similarly, Vikram Seth, I still remember during that time I read the poem, All You Who Sleep Tonight. And even now I can pretty much recite it verbatim, just because it struck such a chord that, there are things that unite us, especially when we're feeling low, and sometimes sharing that is the best thing you can do. So these are books which are by my bedside still. Many of them have been with me, over a dozen, some cases 30 years. And even now I keep referring to them. So that's kind of my go-to playlist on books. In terms of leadership, for me, I don't think it's important that you read books on leadership. But if I think about, what's important for a leader, I think the most important skills for a leader are empathy, curiosity, and the ability to communicate in an authentic way with people. And I think reading gives people a lot of learning on that. Whether you're reading a book on leadership or not, or you're reading a great story where you're figuring out characters and what drives people. Because I think the worst thing a leader can do is, be this cardboard caricature of a corporate leader who's driven by numbers and targets. And it's all bullshit, right? To be honest, ultimately,
Right.
all business, all organizations, no matter whether you're in the corporate world or not, are fundamentally about people. It's about inspiring people towards a common goal. It's about ensuring you understand the motivations of people and you're able to help them grow. Honestly, the construct isn't very different from how you write a story. You have a character, and the character's
Right.
on a quest, and the character is going to go on that quest and encounter obstacles and overcome them. Except in this case, as a leader, you're not the character. The character is your team, and how are
Right.
you helping them grow? So
Right.
for me, the more leaders read, the more they're able to look at things in different ways, the more they're able to understand what makes people tick, the more they're able to make connections in a non-linear way, the more
Right.
they're able to communicate in a way which inspires versus just coming up with 50 PowerPoint slides for every communication task. I think that's the
Right.
magic of reading. And the other thing which I actually think reading is a wonderful way of doing is ultimately, I think a lot of what we do in our lives, whether it's in as leaders or in our families, and you mentioned our traditional ways of helping people and coaching people, it's all storytelling. Now I mean, I have
Right.
memories of my father, my grandfather telling me stories, and that's where you learn a lot. And I
Right.
think one skill which a lot of leaders can build is storytelling. Sometimes the
Right.
most impact you make on people is when you're telling stories of your successes, of your failures, of things that have inspired you.
Right.
That's sometimes when people learn a lot. And I think reading is something that gives leaders exposure to these mindsets.
No, that's quite a relevant point that you've made, particularly about communication, storytelling, and the fact that well, leaders shouldn't be turning into this caricature of a corporate personality. Because when you mentioned it, I can't help but just think of this anecdote I read. I think on Twitter, it was from some startup founder. It was about this like in his early days, he had this conversation with a VC in India. Okay, so it just bear with me for a minute. It's a slightly long story, but it went along the lines of how he'd approached the VC for some funding, and he pitched to him, and the VC had kind of said that your team's too big, and it was a team of about like 10 people, and no, it was a team of 5 people or something, right? He's like, it's too big. So he's like, he was quite taken aback, and he kind of uh, he went back and he was like, okay, he didn't get the funding, and he just trying to informally through some route find out why this what was it about, was this just like a false reason he gave him, because it didn't really make sense to him कि 5 लोग की टीम तो बड़ी नहीं होती. He's like, no, apparently this guy is a huge fan of I think Jeff Bezos, the guy he studied there in the States, and Jeff Bezos has that famous quote, if your team's too big, if you can't feed them with 2 pizzas. And apparently for him that was a thing. But now, and here's the thing, what doesn't translate in that quote is the fact that well, American pizzas are like huge, much bigger compared to what Indian pizzas are. And this very startup founder actually had this conversation with him like 5 years later at some other event, where this actually turned out to where this clarification just left him slightly embarrassed with the VC. But unfortunately it's true, and that's what I like. Coming back to our conversation,
Yeah.
it's what I see with a lot of people around me as well. Like, as in my social circles, I interact with people working in corporate, where there's this mindless work that's created to kind of seem that you're doing something, or seem more professional, but there's clearly a lack of effective communication down in the hierarchy chain, where your job is not being properly communicated to them. I mean, in that sense, I think storytelling is one of the most effective form of communication, as you mentioned, right? Like stories, your parents, your grandparents, incidents with your teachers or professors are things that you remember throughout your life. And yeah, I think in that sense, it's absolutely fantastic that you've kind of zeroed down on this particular thing. So just like a quick fun question, what's your first, like, I'm sure you have your own team that reports to you. What's their take on your leadership posts or on your book? Like, do they pull your
I
leg about
don't know.
it?
I mean, to be honest, you'll have to ask them. I have no idea.
I mean, come
But
on. I'm sure they have come up to you at some point or the other to talk about it.
no, my general approach to life is, what you see is what you get. So I don't think I have a different
Absolutely.
persona
Okay.
as a writer, as someone on social media, as how I show up at work every day. So I'm
Right.
hoping that they're seeing a consistent view of me,
Right.
because when I'm posting, I'm not deeply strategizing. It's typically free
Right.
flowing. I've heard something and I put down what's on my mind and put it out there, and that's how I am in real life as well, outside of posts and books.
Sure. Okay, Menak, unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I just have one last question before we go. What's next? What's next in terms of writing coming from you? I mean, obviously, you have your job going, so that's great, but
Yeah.
I mean, we'd love to see more of your writing. So, is there anything in the works?
Yeah, see, unfortunately, I'm a guy who always has more ideas for books in my mind than I can physically write at any given time. So
Right.
I've got a pipeline of one book that's actually about to get published, which is
Oh,
the third part of my Sniper's Eye series. So that was written long ago. The launch got completely messed up with the lockdown and COVID. Hopefully, it'll see light of day in 2022. Beyond that, I have, I had not written a lot of business books or nonfiction. I think the last couple of books I've written have actually got me thinking about that this is a great way of communicating. One of my mental blocks was I don't want to write boring self-help books where I'm giving gyan, but what I've realized through the process of writing, Leadership in 100 Words and Brand New Start is I can still be a storyteller and connect with people and still share things that are relevant. So that's what
Right.
I'm enjoying. So I do want to write more in this genre. I'm toying with a couple of ideas. I mean, one of the follow throughs that I've got from responses I've got from the book is these are general tips, but one of the things a lot of people grapple with is, look, how do I bring all of these to life depending on what my manager or leaders like?
Right.
Because in the corporate world you meet various archetypes of bosses, and
Right.
I think we've all seen all kinds of people. So how do you navigate
Right.
that? So that's something that's on my mind. When I get time, I'll start working on that idea.
Right. No, please do. I think that's, I can empathize with that need, like, of requiring this customized response to leaders. In fact, so because I run my small firm myself, I think it'll be an interesting idea to kind of read that book as a leader, or like yourself, to kind of see how you can respond better to certain situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But thank you, Mainak, for doing this. This was absolutely lovely. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. And we'll be putting the links to your books in all our description boxes. Guys, please go check it out. I'm 100% sure this is going to help you with your life in general, beyond your corporate life. I think leadership is a concept, exists beyond our professional realms. And please check out Mainak on LinkedIn. He's very active there. And as he said, please feel free to reach out to him and have a as form of communication with him. Thank you so much, Manak.
Thanks for having me over, Siddharth. Pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please check us out on all our social media platforms. We are available across all podcasting platforms on YouTube, on Instagram. You can find us at the rate Kitabi Karwan on Instagram, or just search Kitabi Karwan on Google or a platform of your choice and you'll find us. We carry out Instagram lives, giveaways, we talk about books, we talk to bibliophiles, talk to authors, and basically try and create a reader's world through all of our platforms. Do check us out and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.